All right, Mr. Wade, are we ready to call the meeting to order?
Yes, we are.
All right, let me call the meeting to order. This is the Clean Energy Alliance Community Advisory Committee. And the first item on the agenda is a roll call, I guess. I don't guess, it is actually the first item.
Yes, thank you. Committee Member Ishii. Committee Member Oshley. Committee Member Reed.
Here.
Committee Member Paul.
Yes, present.
Committee Member DeCino. Committee Member Daniels. Committee Member Kirschbaum. Committee Member Najamine. Committee Member Shade. Vice Chair Mosier. Chair Warden.
I'm here too, thank you. All right, next item is the flag salute. Let's stand and if you're able and face the flag. Where is it? Over here. Ready? Begin. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, at this point on the agenda, we have an opportunity for anybody in the public that wants to make a comment on an item that is not on the agenda. I don't see anybody in the room, but Caitlin, do we have anybody who wants to make a comment?
We do not have any public speakers.
All righty, then moving along. Next is the Chief Executive Officer update. So Greg, you're on.
Thank you, Chair Warden and members of the Community Advisory Committee. This will be a very brief update on the rollout for the cities of Vista and Oceanside, just to give you an idea of where we stand with the opt-outs and whatnot. So these are the totals as of May, I believe. So as you can see, the number of eligible customers combined is 98,651. We've got opt-downs to 50% renewable totaling 117, 281 opt-ups. And I just wanted to point out that a large percentage of those are from the city of Vista having opted up their municipal accounts to 100% renewable. There you see the opt-outs at 2,953 and a participation rate of 97.0%. This shows the additional customer account statistics in April. Prior to the launch of the two cities of Oceanside and Vista, we had 153 and 39 total accounts. As of May 2024, we had 247,952, which is obviously due to that launch of the two new member agencies up to 94, which increased that by 94,913. So moving up steadily. I will say that the eligible accounts will fluctuate as we move forward, particularly as a result of net energy metering customers who are enrolled at their true up around their true up dates. So that number will fluctuate. And that really, I just wanted to give an update too on the Solar Plus, and keep in mind that we only just recently, as it's indicated up here, have gone to sort of a full marketing approach to get this out and advertise it. But prior to that time, we now have seen total enrollment in the program of 14 contracts, up from 8 in May. And as I mentioned, we are this week rolling out more targeted marketing approach to get the program announced to the public. We're ready to go. We've worked with Tesla and Participate Energy to get these 14 customers enrolled. We had quite a few others that were enrolled and for various reasons were not eligible, primarily due to the condition of their roofs or the roofing material, and some just withdrew voluntarily. But right now we are making a push on social media as well as press release to get the word out that the program is up and running, and it is even up and running in the cities of Oceanside and Vista. So we expect to see more enrollment as we get that underway. So that concludes the report.
All right, thank you very much, Mr. Wade. Excuse me. Let's see if we have any public comments on the CEO's report.
We do not have any speakers for item 1.
All right, how about board member or advisory committee members' comments or questions? Yes.
Yes, I was at one of our tabling events at the Ocean Hills
Senior Expo, and they said they were told by Tesla that they will not put solar plus with any of their homes because they have tile roofs.
That is likely true. Tile roofs are a roofing type that is not conducive to the program and the parameters that have been established. So that is accurate, unfortunately.
Anybody else?
Yeah.
Yes, Don.
No, I'm sort of surprised at that answer because there is a solar product that is curved to fit on tile roofs. It may be more expensive than the usual solar panels, but it might be nice to consider that as an option that's been available commercially for at least 3 or 4 years. So
Yeah, and I'm familiar with that. What I can do is we can go back to Participate Energy and talk to them about adapting the program to see if there's some way to allow for them to be members of this program. That's just the parameters that have been laid out by Tesla as their primary partner. But as we move into other contractors that could take advantage of this program with us, then that could change. So we'll certainly go back and see if there's something we can do to modify that.
All right, thanks for sharing that. Don? Yes, sir.
Yeah, I would add on to that my house has tile, we did do a re-roof of that portion as part of it. But where I live, that takes out 600 or 700 homes by excluding the tile. I went with a company that actually removes the tile and doesn't put it back underneath the solar. They're one of the few because that does it that way and haven't had any problems with it at all. So I think we need to really look at that as a solution because I would think that probably takes out 50% of our members or more. If it's an exclusion, we need to know what those numbers are because, if it can only serve 50% of our clientele, that's not very, very powerful.
All right, thank you, Tracy. Anybody else comments, questions on the CEO report? Not seeing any. I'll just offer my compliments to Greg and his staff. These opt-out numbers are pretty low at around 3%. And I know when we formed the Clean Energy Alliance, the target was we were hoping to be 10% or lower on the opt-outs because that seemed to be the going rate statewide. And the earlier members of CEA had opt-out rates higher than 3%, as I recall. And I think by and large, the low opt-out rates are attributable to the robust outreach efforts that Greg and his staff has done and that members of this committee have participated in. So hopefully those low rates of opt-out are going to hold and we'll see more of that. Okay, moving along, the next is subcommittee reports. And this, we have a number of subcommittees attached to the agenda is a listing of them. And it's just a chance to chat about what you're doing on your committee. If you need help with anything, to let us know. So let's just start right up with, well, actually, since I know what my own committee is, we'll start with that one. What used to be called the Underserved Community Committee, and now we've given it a new name because these are all new committees. They're not continuations of the old one. And we have had one meeting and we've discussed what we can do to move forward from what we did last year was we identified various tools for measuring and identifying where underserved communities were. And we outlined in broad terms some of the strategies and programs that could be considered to address those underserved communities. This year, our committee is focusing on trying to go member by member and identify in Oceanside, for example, what are the underserved communities and what are the programs that might be adapted to them. And we are in the process of coordinating that with Greg and his staff because I know they're doing outreach to each of these cities. And so before our committee members start contacting local city planning departments or managers' offices, we want to coordinate with him. So that's where we are. That's where we're headed. Does anybody else on that committee want to make a comment about what we're doing, or anybody on any other committee or in this group have a question about what we're doing? All righty, that's it. Okay, who would like to volunteer for their committee to tell us what you're doing? Don't everybody jump forward at once. Deborah, go ahead.
All right. Okay, so I'm reporting for the schools committee. First of all, I just want to thank our committee, Nancy Oshie, Paige Tessino, um, Jennifer Kirschbaum, Linda Daniels, and Mo, and he's not here, so I couldn't get a verification of how to pronounce his last name, but everybody knows Mo. I just want to go through sort of the meeting notes. We met a week ago just to overview our meeting with our new CEO, Greg Wade, and then talk about where we are this year with some of the recommendations we presented to the board last year. One thing before I get started, we do have questions about where we are with that. We came to the board, we all gave reports to the board. We're just wondering, are we going to have a filtered list to activate or where we are on that? So that's something to you, Chairman. Maybe you can get that information for us. Second thing is we discussed the Green Champions Program that Greg Wade described at the last meeting, and believe that this is a good fit for our schools program. Just run it under the same thing, have it part of that program, use the same monikers and help get that information out and use it as almost like a marketing effort with our schools as well. So we were pretty excited about that and feel like there's no reason to do it separately for schools, just try to, build them into that program. The other thing is the committee is really committed to exploring ways to connect with our student populations as our CEA gets built out and has full enrollment. We're very interested in looking at sort of designing a school's outreach program on environmental stewardship and clean energy, some kind of curriculum that we can partner with schools, have city volunteers that work at school health fairs and things like that, just to make sure that we're out there, the branding is getting out there, and it also fulfills the mission of the organization for developing our next group of leaders in this space. So we're still working on that, and that's something I believe we're going to present with a little bit more breadth to the board at the end of this year. And then lastly, I just want to talk about some new legislation, SB 1378, sponsored by Becker, who is in, I believe, the Santa Clara area of California. It's definitely in Northern California. And this would to amend Section 2827 of the Public Utilities Code to increase the ability of LEAs, which are code for schools, local education agencies, to sell the generation of excess electricity to their local utility networks, thereby increasing revenue generation to serve the needs of schools. The issues are, as the legislature had pursued efforts to create equity in the distribution of costs that are impacted due to increased solar production, they aren't considering the type of agency, whether it's residential, commercial, or a public agency that's producing that. And when you're a public school or a public entity and you use public funds to put solar on your buildings with the idea that you will be generating energy from that, and then to be told that you're not going to be able to do that, therein lies the problem. So the way we look at this is an opportunity to mitigate some of the energy costs in a different way. We had talked about a subsidized rate. Not sure that our board has the appetite for that. I've presented that multiple times over the last 4 years, and I've yet to see anybody gravitate to that. This is a way that the schools with solar would be able to use that excess energy, thereby offsetting costs, thereby giving back to the schools and to the education of students. So it's a win-win for education. A lot of people are on board. Of course, San Diego Unified's on board, many school districts, many climate action groups. And I believe right now it's passed the Senate. It's in the Utilities Committee, I believe. And, schools are basically solar farms in the summer, and we've talked about this. A lot of schools used public funds with the idea that this would be a win-win for the bottom line for their budget, and now are realizing that that might be taken away. So we would really urge, as this legislation begins to move, support from our group, certainly from our committee. And then I'm going to ask Greg Wade to sort of chime in and sort of share what he's learned in terms of the community power groups and how they view this legislation. But for our committee, we see this as a really great opportunity, to mitigate the cost and take something that's being built. And first of all, schools are not going to put solar on their buildings unless there is some benefit. When you use public funds for that, you're taking public funds away from the classroom, and you really have to have the certain kind of board that has the mindset that this is a goal for the district, which is a very hard decision to make in not lean and very lean times for education, which is going to be this upcoming year. So it's just for me, the California School Board Association, which I'm vice president of, is supporting this. And I just see it as a win-win. So with that, I don't know if you want to chime in now or if you wanted to share something about it later.
I appreciate that. I don't have too much to add other than we had a really good conversation, Community Advisory Committee member Shade and I on Monday. I have reached out to Cal CCA. Their standard sort of line is that they try to avoid the NBT issues and this net billing tariff, and this is I guess categorized in that realm. And really the issue here is that there are many schools that, as was pointed out, generate quite a bit of solar power. And if you're in the net energy metering NEM 1.0 or grandfathered in, there's some benefit at least in your surplus generation. But moving forward with the new NEM 3.0, reduces that benefit by upwards of 75%. The cost equation is really kind of going away, or the cost recovery benefit is going away. And so the idea would be that these schools and other institutions could use what I believe is analogous to a rate that we have, which is the Renewable Energy Self-Generation Billing Credit Transfer, or RESBCT. I like to think of it as the Aretha Franklin rate. But what it allows you to do is just that, if you have an on-site meter that has behind the meter generation, you can transfer credits over the course of time to other meters on the site. In fact, we do have a customer, the Carlsbad Municipal Water District has an RESBCT rate, and they do just that. So this bill is attempting, at least in my initial investigation, to set up that structure here. Because right now, if it's a single meter and you have a large solar generating facility on weekends and in the summer, there's a lot of export to the grid, and then the benefit that will come back to the schools is minimal. And so the other members of Cal CCA that I've spoken with are interested in this bill. There's quite a bit of support. There does not appear to be, at least at this point, at the legislative committee of Cal CCA, a strong push for support on this bill, but I will be talking to them to see if that's going to change, because I imagine CCAs and cities will be hearing from their school districts. I think there's only one city. There's a long list of support, but I think the only city in the state is the city of Laguna Beach that's been on record as supporting this. So doing some research, I don't have anything immediate to report other than at the very least, there may be, even without SB 1374, and you are correct, it will be heard at the Assembly Utilities and Energy Commission next week in a hearing. It did pass out of the Senate initially with a pretty strong vote. I think it was 28-6 or something along those lines. So I think there's quite a bit of support. It's got a head of steam, but I'll be doing more research to see where it might land. And what I was going to say is, even without this, there may be an RESBCT rate structure that we could try to devise for school districts, because they are eligible for that rate.
All right, thank you for that important topic. Deborah, do you have more?
I have just one other point, because it is something that we're actively discussing, is the opportunity possibly for batteries, some sort of storage idea. Of course, you can't put anything on a school campus without it going through 95 hoops, because you have students on campus. But there's some opportunity possibly there as well for schools. We're just getting into the early stages of talking about that and whether that's viable for schools.
All right, questions or for Deborah? Yes.
I just have a question for Greg, clarification. So part of the issue with the schools is that they have multiple meters and they can't transfer that energy generation from one meter to another. Is that what I'm,
That's my understanding.
Okay.
That's part of the problem they're
Okay.
looking at solving, yes.
okay, thanks.
Anything else? Then let me ask Greg, do you see a role for this advisory committee in this whole subject matter?
That's a good question. I would say the committee, well, I think at this point, staff is going to be taking a look at it. I would say at this point, not yet, but as we get closer to the legislative cycle wrapping up, there might be some effort in at least some more research. But I think this bill has a lot of support. The ones I've seen, it seems to have a pretty good base of support, but you just never know until September. So at this point, that's a good question. Let me think about it and get back to you. But
Okay.
the committee itself, I think, has done some good work, and just having a conversation with me and has helped advance it. So I've put out the feelers at Cal CCA, and I'll see what we can come up with. But I don't have a good answer for you at this point. I was thinking in terms of what other elements of this could be, or other support could be garnered. But as I said, I mean, this thing does seem to have quite a bit of support right now. So that said, if the subcommittee wanted to try to reach out to other areas to see what might be done to garner additional support, or what kind of chances of success this bill has, that might be something they could look into, as we will be doing as well.
Great. And if when you look into it, you think the support for the bill is appropriate, and if there's time to bring it to this committee, we could look at it and recommend that to the board of directors of CEA. If there are other opportunities, I think I'm going to speak for everybody, so anybody speak up if you disagree, that we view the school population, the public school population, as an important part of our constituency. It's a huge opportunity. And that we would recommend to Greg and our board that all the opportunities be investigated to help them, not just support of this bill, but is there potentially a program we as Clean Energy Alliance could do to subsidize some of the school activities to make net energy meeting more viable for them, that might be cost effective for us in terms of kilowatt hour saved or whatever, or if there are federal climate monies. I know there's tons of it out there for various programs. Maybe we can get at some of that. So I think we would like you to look at all the opportunities to help this important constituency. Deborah, did I say it right? Close enough? Well, their constituencies of Clean Energy Alliance. Yeah. And a question to you, are you working just with public schools, or are we engaging in all with private schools too?
Well, a private school, I don't think would fall under the groups that would be considered under the legislation. We have not been talking about private schools, but I don't think there's any reason why we couldn't engage with that population as well.
Yeah, I think the public schools is the larger group, and fellow governments with us, so that's appropriate. But at some point, private schools are constituents too.
Well, I mean, on the education, certainly.
Yeah.
Right, absolutely. But on, like the clean energy, that sort of falls under their business, right? They're more of a business entity that would get a green champion sticker versus, but we could work on that and make that, an appetite for all private schools as well. And I'll just bring that to the committee. They're all here, except for Mo, and we can talk about that and see how we could fold that in.
Okay,
Good idea.
all right. Yes,
I just want to know if it's worth the individual representatives to contact our school districts to ask for support. Deborah, what do you think?
Absolutely.
Okay.
It's moving along, and
Right.
the way you get the support, you just don't, I mean, the list of sign-ons is it's like 3 long pages of people and entities, but it's engaging with your local representative who's going to be voting on it when it comes to the assembly floor, because it's through the Senate. So engaging with your assembly members and telling them how important this bill is for schools and, and for the environment and all the other parts that I would certainly do that. And you can go talk at your public school districts and share some of the support that's already on here. I mean, San Diego Unified is a big one. LA Unified is a big one. Santa Clara Unified is a big one. I mean, there's some very big, large school districts that are on board. And certainly most of those have a lot of solar. So this would significantly impact their ability to utilize that energy generation.
And that is a way that might be
Yeah.
appropriate for the committee definitely to get involved, because the only school districts that, at least in the as of the printing of the update that I have, are, as was mentioned, San Diego Unified and Grossmont School District. Those are the only two that I've seen in San Diego County, Long Beach, Los Angeles, Ukiah. So that might be a way to get some additional support if there's more school districts that are willing to step up and adopt a resolution.
Let me ask Greg and Deborah too, then, might it be appropriate for the League of California Cities or the California State Association of Counties to weigh in? They don't run schools, but the people who attend schools are also constituents of cities and counties. And I try to keep track of the League of Cities stuff, and I haven't seen anything about this bill in their material.
Well, public agencies are also going to be included in this.
Mhm.
So if they have solar on their parking lots, and so I'm focused on the school side, but there's another side to it in public agencies in general, water districts. So certainly
There you go. All right, just so everybody's clear, what's the bill number again?
1378.
Or
Four.
that's Senate bill. It's a Senate bill, and Becker is the
Yeah.
author.
Okay, very good. All right, anything else on schools before we move on? Yes, sir.
Is this like a caveat from the community power to basically let schools continue with what they're already doing? Because isn't the community power NEM or whatever is what is affecting all of these? And this bill counters that, or?
No, so this bill doesn't seek to roll back any of the new net energy metering 3.0 changes. It simply what it will do is require the PUC to adopt special tariffs that allow local governments and other special districts to have the special billing tariff that allows you to transfer the benefits of that solar to other meters on site. And I don't know if it also allows you to do it offsite. I think it's all on site. So
Like if you were a commercial business, you wouldn't come under this. It's only the schools.
these are, yeah, the RESBCT and this bill is proposing it to be for governmental entities, not private.
Okay.
Dwight,
All right, yes, sir.
so if, I'd be willing to talk to the Escondido schools about this, but could I get some talking points from staff to bring with me?
What we can do is we can send out this fact sheet from Senator Becker's office. It has a lot of good information. It
Great.
lays out the issue pretty well, pretty simply, and it has the list of supporters as well.
Cool, that would be nice.
Yeah, if you've got that, why don't you share it with everybody? All right, anything more on schools? If not, who would like to volunteer to go next? I don't have my list of committees in front of me, but there's a reincarnation of the EV team. Is that you, Don?
The EV committee had one meeting that I attended, and at that meeting, we elected Kevin Norris as chair, and I resigned as chair because I'm traveling too much. And I think there was another attempt to schedule another meeting when I was traveling last week, and I don't think that meeting happened, right? So,
Okay.
so not much to report. One meeting, and we said we were going to help look for grants for charging stations. And Kevin had a lot of useful information about that, but since he isn't here, I don't remember that information. So
All righty.
not much to say.
We'll get an update later. And I think sort of the informal schedule we're working on is hoping to bring to some form of conclusion each committee's work product so that we can report it to the board at the end of the year. And if you're still in process, that's okay. We can characterize it as an interim report. But that would be the goal, to have something to share with the board towards the end of the year. All right, who else? Alan, do you have a listing of the committees handy and can refresh me
do.
who they?
Yes, so we have the EV infrastructure and incentives. I believe that's what you just
Yes.
discussed. Program for disadvantaged communities, we discussed. Schools outreach, we discussed. And so the remaining two are outreach to new communities and green by 2035.
All right, how about outreach to new communities? Is there anybody in the room that's on that committee? I guess then we don't have a report, but do you have a listing there of who's on the committee? Just to inquire if they're here, if they need help in some way. Dolores Jameson, I think, is on it, and she's not here today. So, okay, just you let us know if you need some help in some way. Otherwise, we'll count on you. This is a gentle prod on your own. Schedule a meeting and get going. All righty. What's the other committee?
Green by 2035.
Green by 2035. Yes, Tracy.
Actually, I just did some research from a message last night. Well, I think what our committee's kind of come up with is that by state law, we have to be 100% by 2035. And I think the general idea is that do we just jump from 50 to 100% there, or should there be some kind of a transition? And since all the cities voted on what they picked as their default, there needs to be some kind of information put out there that we need to somehow transition between now and 2035 to the 100%, that it's just not all of a sudden you can only have 100% in 2035. I reached out to Sonoma, and their CEO got back to me saying that there was some state legislation that says by 2030, everybody has to be 60%. And it gave me a ratio. We're already at 50%, but if the 60 hits in 2030, I think from us to the board is that there needs to be some kind of a transition plan of ratcheting that up from where we're at now to 100%. What I found out that also some cities are more for carbon-free percentages higher than renewable percentages. And I was told that, and I'm still reaching out to another city area. But I think we just need to put that on their list, that we need to have that in our game plan to transition from 50 to 100 for everybody within that time frame. Is it made that, like I said, and I found out that by 2030, we have to be at 60 is the lowest we can offer.
All right, thanks. And Greg, if you want to weigh in on, go ahead. So sorry, Roger,
Well,
go ahead.
I can tell you that our Oceanside cap just came out this week for review. And in it, they're stating that the city and the residents of the city will have to be to 100% by 2030, I believe. And they talk about talking to CEA about that. So you can expect them to start some contact at some point.
Okay, thanks for that. Deborah.
So I'm wondering, is there a plan? I guess Greg is going to speak to this, but is there a plan within the CEA that every year, whatever your baseline is going to go up, some percentage is going to be an adjustment, or has there been discussion at all on the
think it's
board
pretty
about
much what
that?
Tracy said, we've got the finish line goal and we don't really have a strategic plan on how to get there unless Greg corrects me.
Well, yeah, thank you. So there is an item on the agenda that speaks to this specifically, and it talks about the legislation. There was a request, I believe it was Mr. Reed who requested that we have a discussion on this. So we'll have a little overview of SB 350 and SB 100 that set these mandates. The mandate actually at the state level is 100% renewable by 2045. Most of the caps, if not all of them, of member agencies have a more aggressive schedule, including our JPA agreement, which is 100% by 2035. So we do have a plan in place, and you'll see a slide that we put up there that shows, generally speaking, how we plan to up our baseline renewable over time. And as you know, we are currently at a 75% GHG-free default product, so 50% renewable, and then the rest, 25%, is GHG-free, mostly large hydro. But then our RPS is programmed to escalate at a moderate rate in these next couple of years, up to 55%, and then after the next 2 years, then up to 60%. And then up to 90%. And so we do have an idea of how we're going to progress up to that 100% by 2035. A lot of it is market dependent. There right now, as you'll see in the budget update and the rate discussion, it's a constrained market. There's scarcity of resources, and then the cost of that energy is getting is extremely high. So there are constraints as to how aggressively we approach this, but there are plans to do so. Cities individually have the ability, if they have a more aggressive cap, to adopt or move up at least their municipal accounts. They could even, if they elected to do so, request that the board consider a default product of 100% for those cities. Now, that's not saying that we'd still have those lower, 75% GHG free and 50% renewable products on offer, but we've excuse me, as we'll present soon, the 50% is our baseline. It can't go below 50%, and we can never go below SDG&E's baseline, currently around 44.8%. So there are ways that the board can address this, will address this as we move closer to that 60% by 2030. And so again, our particular goal right now is to go to 75% in 2030 for the baseline, and then go up to 100% by 2035. So long answer is yes, we had a plan. We have a plan. We discuss it frequently with our risk oversight committee. We haven't discussed it at the board level in terms of a firm set plan, but we have a guiding idea of how we should get there, because it is a gradual movement. What is not gradual, and you'll see with the chart we present, is the state's mandate, because the state doesn't go any higher than 60% in 2030, and then in 2045 it shoots up to 100.
All right, thank you. I think that's an important topic. Yes, sir, Ron.
Just a quick question. So San Diego Gas and Electric is also under the same mandate in terms of those dates and percentage renewables. Greg, do you have a feeling for how that's going to impact the rates themselves?
It's difficult to say. It's a great question. They are, as you say, that is accurate, that all load serving entities have to comply with those state mandates. The more renewable you procure, the higher your rates generally are going to be because of the cost of renewable. Now, we don't know if the costs are going to stay high for the time being, but the benefit also SDG&E has is that their load has diminished quite a bit. So they don't have to procure for as much as even we do. Frankly, at this point, I think their customer base or their account numbers about ours are slightly less. So the answer is, generally speaking, it could impact rates. It could make rates higher, but it's hard to really say. We're working with their current ERA forecast that just got published or presented to the PUC for the IOUs, and we can talk a little bit about that, or will, in the budget discussion, but they're showing their generation rates for bundled customers going down slightly, but there's a long way to go between now and December.
All right, yes.
So here is my concern. State mandate will be coming soon. And also, dear Greg, you mentioned that the scarcity of resources, cost issue is here. And also, I talked to the few people around my neighborhood. And so why you don't opt up? And then their answer is usually cost. Or do we have enough renewable energy? That always comes up these two. And that seemed like a summary of what you mentioned, the resource issue and then cost issue. I wonder this, if we want to get as many people as possible to be on 100% renewable, somehow we need to help them to reduce this anxiety, worry, concern. And then somehow we have to show our plan, we can do this. And then on the top of that, we have to meet the state mandate anyway. So that's why I'm thinking maybe we have to post something on our website, or at least the FAQ place. So something that gives resident or members a confidence that they can opt up and then they'll be fine.
Yes, I think those are very good points. And Tracy, we'll look to your committee to bring back to us your suggestions on how we can help with this. And Greg, if and when the CEA board focuses on a specific strategic plan to get us there, ask them to identify what parts of that we can help with. I think, there's a bunch of pieces to the puzzle to get to 100%, including dealing with RA and the RPS system and contracting and all of that, which probably isn't too much in our bailiwick. But the part of the puzzle that involves getting our neighbors and people to upgrade to 100% green, that is in our wheelhouse where I think we can help. So we'll look for that. And let's just put a pin in this because we're going to hear more about it, I think, in the next agenda item on SB, whatever they are, 350 and 100. Any final comments or questions about this topic? I think we have now finished our committee reports. So let me just ask if there are any members of the public that wish to comment on any of the committee discussions that we've had.
We do not have any speakers for item 2.
All right, thank you. I see Elizabeth smiling. I'm being a good boy today and asking. All right, next agenda item is SB 350 and SB 100. So Greg?
Thank you, Chair, members of the committee. We are going to have Caitlin McGee give this presentation. Caitlin's one of our key accounts program managers and is quite familiar with these goals and targets. So I'll turn it over to Caitlin.
Question is this on? It's on. Like Greg mentioned, I'm Caitlin McGee, Key Accounts Program Manager here at Clean Energy Alliance. I think you did half the task for me already, so this will be good. And like Greg mentioned, this really comes from an ask that there was an update and some information on the 2035 goal and what state requirements are. So here is just a brief overview of some of the Senate bills that shaped the Renewable Portfolio Standard Program, or the RPS program. So California's RPS program was established by Senate Bill 1078. And the RPS program was, subsequently modified through various bills and added to the Public Utilities Code. So it's had its fair share of adjustments. The California Public Utilities Commission is the one that is responsible for establishing the RPS requirements for the utilities and enforcing any penalties for noncompliance. So starting with that SB 1078, the RPS program started with an initial requirement of just 20% of electricity sales must be served by renewable resources by 2017. And then SB 350 came along and established a 50% RPS target by 2030. That also added some compliance periods. So like you mentioned earlier, there's little tranches where utilities are required to increase year by year up to 2030. And then SB 100 in 2018 accelerated that goal of 50% by 2030 to 60% by 2030. And some of those tranches up until 2030 are 40% by the end of 2024, 52% renewable by 2027, and then you get to that 60% by 2030. SB 100 also established a goal of carbon-free, 100% carbon-free electricity by 2045 as well. So that's kind of the state, context, but also there is what's stated in Clean Energy Alliance's JPA. And so CEA's ultimate objective, right, shall be to achieve and sustain a renewable energy portfolio with 100% renewable energy at competitive rates, no later than 2035 and beyond. Kind of the second piece there is that CEA's base product shall be 50% or greater of the qualified renewable resources. And also at no point should the base product have fewer renewable resources than SDG&E's base product. So this is the chart that Greg had mentioned there. So that top left orange line represents our carbon-free electricity. And this is really intended to demonstrate the Clean Impact Plus product, which is the default product for all of our member cities. And kind of going back to that discussion earlier, right? The green line there in the middle is CEA's increase in renewable resources heading up to 2035, right? And so some of that conversation earlier was that the state program remains relatively flat until 2045, at least as it stands right now. So really, I hope that the takeaway from this visual is we're really aggressive in our goals and the timeline of that. But how do we get there? It's a lot of work. And really, these bullet points are summarizing a white paper that the California Energy Commission had put out on really assessing the value of long duration energy storage in California. But I felt like these points really applied to CEA's operations as well. And so, right, tracking emerging technologies, like I said, long duration storage likely will be critical in retiring gas resources. Many batteries are 4 hours duration currently, and really investing in 12-hour and up energy resources is critical. It's also, a benefit to the air pollution for many of these gas resources that should be retired in the long run. Also, aligning our renewable resources with our local system needs. So although, as everyone tries to get closer to 100% renewable energy, there's a lot more solar being built. And there are several days or points throughout the year where the grid is seeing over 100% solar resources on the grid. So that structure kind of is broken, right? There's going to be negative pricing. There's going to be resources that we would need in the later times of the day. So really trying to create a mix of renewable resources that meet our hourly needs. And then also utilizing energy efficiency and load flexibility to help us meet those peak times of demand, which is really where you see the most polluting energy or non-renewable resources being deployed. And then lastly, really focusing on regulation and policy to increase grid capacity, right? One of our constraints right now is the transmission planning and interconnecting generation resources that have been backlogged for several years and getting those new renewable resources online. So that's all I have, short and sweet. I'm happy to take any questions or open it up for discussion.
Thank you. Yes.
Yeah, thank you for that presentation. I just had a question on the graph. If you could go back to the slide that shows the renewables over time. Could you talk about the difference, like where we are right now in 2024, 2025, between carbon-free and renewable? What's the delta there? I'm sorry, let me clarify that. So why do we have more carbon-free, and where is that energy coming from?
And I think that's kind of one of the complex items with this graph. We were trying to show our Clean Impact Plus product in the best way. So really read this as that green line is our 50% base product. And then we're layering on the 25% of our Clean Impact Plus carbon-free portion into that. And so that's kind of hopefully helping you visualize the Clean Impact Plus product.
I think
Just to get a little more
Go ahead,
specificity,
Greg.
so the 25% is largely made up from large hydro generation. Large hydro generation is not classified as renewable because among other things, of the jobs creation issues, local jobs and some other factors that by definition, it just it isn't eligible to be considered renewable, but it is carbon free. So a lot of large hydro is part of portfolios for carbon free. It's clean energy. It's just how we supplement that 25% adder for that default product. So that's the large chunk of it. They're also, by virtue of the Diablo Canyon nuclear facility, although they've delayed its closure, there's allocations that are made available to load serving entities throughout the state. Some have opted to take that energy, some have opted not to. The price for that energy was so insanely low at the time it was offered that CEA opted to take a small portion of that energy, and there's still allocations coming. So, but it's a very minor part of that 25%.
Thank you.
Yes, Deborah.
So can you go back to the slide with the legislation on it? So I'm just very curious, when it says must, clearly when you say must, there are something tied to that if you do not, or you miss your target. So I'm curious, it looks like our community power group is on target, but clearly there are other players out there. What happens if you don't make your target? Is it a fine that has to be distributed across the customer base? How does that work? And do you know that, was that included as this legislation moved on? Did they clarify that? And is that more clear now? What happens if you don't meet your targets?
Yeah, and I think what you'll see too, as these pieces of legislation have come up, it moves from must to a target or a goal. The language has changed, but also that's the important piece that I added there for SB 350, right? When the RPS goal was accelerated or increased to 2030, they also implemented 3-year compliance periods. So not only are the utilities and CCAs required to enter into long-term contracts that are the length of 10 years. So 65% of that renewable requirement has to be in the form of long-term contract. And you have to show that through these 3-year compliance periods. So there's a pretty solid process. I'm not sure what the penalties are. Maybe Greg can speak to that.
So interestingly, while the penalties for missing your obligations that you put in at the PUC and at CAISO for the energy you do procure, meeting those targets, the PUC hasn't clearly defined those penalties. They've been tasked with doing so, but they're not clearly defined. I think most entities of which I'm aware have met the targets. And as you mentioned, CEA clearly intended to overshoot the mark on those benchmarks so that we would be in compliance. But at this point, I couldn't say whether it's a certain dollar per percentage point below those mandated targets.
Okay.
Other questions, comments on this? I had a couple with regard to the grid expansion, which is so critical to this whole operation. Who's responsible for doing that? Is each independent utility operator responsible for planning and building out the grid in its region, or is the CAISO or somebody else overseeing the whole statewide system? And who oversees the interconnection with our state system with the national system? Because it all has to work together, right?
Yes, it does. And I think the answer is yes.
Yeah,
So-
and I know the answer is we
So
don't
we start
control.
with
right?
start with the IOUs and the munis who build the infrastructure. They have a responsibility to, I wouldn't say they're mandated to, but they have a responsibility to maintain and add where necessary transmission and distribution facilities. CAISO, and Caitlin, having had some experience there, might be able to elucidate some more, but they regulate interconnections to the grid throughout the state, as well as interconnections with other states. So we're part of the Western region. That is an area that encompasses most of the Pacific Northwest, even as far as Wyoming and a small part of South Dakota, I learned yesterday, and parts of northern Mexico. That when you get into that area, then FERC becomes involved. So why I sort of, and Jess said yes, every agency. So it starts with the utilities right up to CAISO, who manages the grid for California, and as well as energy coming from other states. But the FERC also oversees that interstate transmission and distribution. So it's a multi-pronged, I guess,
Complex, yeah.
complex issue. And one of the things that we've talked about quite a bit lately is I think somebody alluded to the amount of renewables. So we could, if everybody in the state were to say, okay, we're going to 100%, that might be a problem because the 100% right now, that might overtap not only the available resources. It wouldn't do so, in my opinion, during the day, as Caitlin mentioned. And if you're interested in watching this on a daily basis, Cal ISO has an app. You can watch how much energy on a daily basis. And when we started this conversation, I looked at my phone. The state was being served by 91% renewable energy. It's now down to, hold on, 86%. So it's that classic duck curve. Some of the things that we've looked at is that over the last 10 years, the dramatic increase in renewables, particularly solar, has been astonishing. So in 2005, there were 2 megawatts of PV solar in the state. In 2023, there are almost 20,000 megawatts of solar. That's an increase of almost 1,000,000%. And so, and at the same time, the generating capacity for our gas generation has decreased by 15.8%. So California is going in the right direction, but what has become clear is that there's a lot of time during the day or the night rather, when you don't have access to that energy, which is why, as Caitlin pointed out, what can we do? The storage becomes immensely important, as well as resources that are not weather dependent. Geothermal is becoming a big hot commodity, and no pun intended, as well as wind. And so those are the things that we have to start looking at, and the storage question becomes a big one. So the other thing is that at CAISO, there are a lot of renewable projects waiting in the queue for this. That's another function they perform, is to oversee interconnections for utility grade renewable energy. And there's a lot of projects waiting in that queue to get the go ahead to be constructed. And that backlog is creating a tighter constraint on available resources. So our expectation as a group is that over the next 2 years, there'll be some, that backlog will get worked through. Those projects will come online, and not only the availability, but the price of that resource will start to relax. And so that's what's expected. We've already seen some relaxation of resource adequacy prices just in the market the last week. For the summer months, which is a huge high demand for resource adequacy. So there's a lot of variables at play here with a lot of different partners that are involved. But the IOUs in particular for us have a huge responsibility in making sure the grid has transmission facilities and maintaining those facilities. Transformers are appropriately installed so that projects can be interconnected and that capacity is there and can be functioning on the grid. So there's a lot of moving parts, but everyone's working in this direction, including the IOUs. It's just, it takes time. As much time as it takes to put a battery potentially on a school site, we're talking about putting, multi-billion-dollar facilities in place in the ocean, in other sites in the valleys of California and wherever that don't always get responded to in a real strongly supportive way, particularly when we're talking about storage and battery storage.
Thank you, Greg. And for the piece of this puzzle that's full of complexities, that's just limited to grid adequacy, is there somebody or someplace that we could go look and see? Is there a master plan for how to expand the grid and make it keep up over time that we could look at?
Yeah, and kind of to add to Greg's point, right? Even now, it's really starting with the FERC, Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. They just came out with a transmission plan requirement for a lot of the regional system operators. So it's something that is becoming critical across the nation. So the California ISO is responsible for the transmission planning, right? Like Greg said, it's the distribution systems is the responsibility of the investor-owned utilities. But the California ISO has an annual planning process called the transmission planning process, and that's every year. They just wrapped up their most recent one. And then they also now have a 20-year outlook that they put together for the transmission planning process as well. So they work closely with the CPUC and other agencies on that as well, but they have maps and those plans all on their website.
All right, thank you for that. I had one other question that's basic. The percentages required by state law, are those applied to each entity individually, or are they on average? So if we're doing 60% and our neighbor's doing 30%, have we met the 50% goal because on average we've met it, or do we each have to meet it? I know under our own JPA agreement, that goal applies just to us, but under the state bills, how do?
So I believe that's what SB 350 and SB 100 changed, where originally it was kind of that group goal, and now it's the individual utilities themselves.
All right. Any other
And-
questions,
and
comments?
As a matter of fact,
Yes.
we have to, we publish every year, we publish a power content label for
Right.
our energy. And that's a requirement for load serving entities to do that, to show how they've sourced their energy and whether they've met those, not only the targets that the state mandates, but we use them for our internal targets as well.
Excellent. Jennifer.
Just a quick clarification question. The transmission planning process, what agency does that? And yeah, so where do we find that information?
That is the California Independent System Operator, or
Okay.
ISO.
Thank you.
And it'll be they have like a stakeholder engagement and transmission planning webpage.
And I couldn't tell you exactly where to look there, but if you try searching around, I would look for it and found it. They do have a list of the projects in the queue for interconnection approval, and they can tell you the status of each one, and there are hundreds.
And for us, well, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, one of the reasons Clean Energy Alliance is looking at microgrids is that's a way to sort of dodge this problem of deficiencies in the larger grid, correct?
Yes, it can help. It can primarily, what they help with is decreasing your resource adequacy requirements. So where each load serving entity has a resource adequacy requirement, microgrids can be very effective, especially when paired with solar or battery storage in decreasing your requirement for resource adequacy. That's where they really help
All right.
immediately for us.
Final questions, comments on the state bills? Thank you very much, Caitlin. I'm not seeing anybody. Do we have any members of the public that wanted to comment on this item?
We do not have any speakers for item 3.
All right, thank you. Moving on to the next item on our agenda is fiscal year 2024-25 budget discussion. Back to you, Greg.
Yes, it is back to me. Hold on. Okay, thank you, Chair and members of the committee. This is a forecast of the year end, as well as an update on the budget or draft budget that's going to be presented to the board on the 27th of this month. And along with it, it'll give you some, as I mentioned earlier, some overview of the energy market, as well as what that means for rates moving forward. And we'll go into that, and I'll let you know what the board had recommended at their last meeting in May. So this is our current budget projection through June 30th, the end of this fiscal year. On the left is, you can see the actuals, and we're a month delayed in getting our actual final numbers. So that's the end of March 31st. It shows that number. So the forecast for the end of the fiscal year would be a net position change of $423,000. As you can see, that's dramatically less than the forecasted number when the budget was adopted last year of 17.5 million. That is due primarily, if you look in the upper right-hand corner up there at energy costs, net operating revenues, a $29.1 or $2 million decrease in expected revenues. While it was offset a little bit by the $12.5 million in less or lower expenses, obviously it didn't subsume that entire amount. That was the lion's share of that deficit, if you will. And that was created by a couple things, one of which was for expansion areas in that summer. And this was Escondido and San Marcos, that we got load forecasts from SDG&E that well overshot the mark in terms of what our actual energy usage and demand was over the summer. We had a relatively mild summer last summer. And so when you have a load forecast against which you procure energy in advance that is way higher than you actually have, and the demand goes down, so too do the prices in the day ahead market. You're selling that energy back under contract, and it's a double whammy, so to speak. You've got more energy than you need, and you're selling it onto the grid at less than you paid for it. So that's kind of what happened to account for that $29.2 million operating deficit. The key assumptions when we put together our this coming bill are that we do for our year-to-date comparisons are listed there. One thing is that we will begin serving the channel side, the desalination plant account beginning in January of 2025. That's a really large load. It's about 10% of our load. It's going to be under a separate wholesale market access tariff, and it's going to be independently accounted for, independently procured for, and also it provides for an agreed upon cost coverage as well as an overhead for legal and staff time. So that's separately accounted for. The program budget also is looking at increasing over the next 5 years. There was a $0 program budget this year, so our programs largely were zero cost. We're in this next fiscal year, we're projecting or putting in a $600,000 really modest budget for programs, and then you can see in each of the next year, several years after, increasing by $2 million each of those years. Although there are no plans to hire additional staff at this point, we factored into the budget a 25% staffing increase year over year for overhead, as well as the potential if the board supports that staff, but we do not currently have plans to increase our staff at this time. This is the rather dire outlook if we stay at our current rates. And as you can see, our preliminary budget for next year shows a net change in net position of 13.7 million. And then on the out years for the next 4 years, you can see it just gets subsequently more challenging. I will say that we have not adjusted our rates in about a year and a half. The last time we changed our rates was in February of 2023. And with the projected forecasts or projected rate proposals, we still won't change our rates until November of this year. So almost 2 years going on, close to 2 years without changing our rates. And as we'll see in a couple of the other slides, rate stability is something that we've always espoused as a rate setting priority. But as you can see, this is unsustainable. So we therefore had to look at our rates and do some analyses on what we might be able to do to meet our costs and fund reserves, as well as to meet our line of credit covenants with JP Morgan. You can see there, as I mentioned just now, that we adopted rates in February 2023. They were adopted in January and went into effect February. Results in a CEA charge of roughly $25 per month in the winter and $90 per month in the summer. The rates go up dramatically in the summer. That's not unlike any other load serving entity. At the time of setting those rates, we were compliant with our covenants with JP Morgan, and I'll get into that a little bit here. So we were setting rates to cover our costs, and we were also setting them to meet our debt service coverage and days liquidity on hand requirements. We were addressing our cash flow needs at that time. We had achieved rate stability, and we had achieved rate competitiveness to SDG&E. This shows you just exactly how competitive we were, and I'm happy to report that up until May 31st of this year, our rates have been lower than SDG&E's on average for a typical residential customer, except for the cities of Escondido and San Marcos, where due to a higher PCIA, as you can see right here, this PCIA cost, which is much higher than the rest of the cities, it pushed it slightly higher than the overall SDG&E bundled rate for customers' average electricity bill this is for the winter months. You'll see the footnote there. I want to make it clear that the winter rates are in effect for 7 months of the year, November through May, and then the summer rates are effective 5 months of the year, June through October. So keep that in mind as we look at some of the averages. But as you can see there, the winter is about $25 on the generation side. Another thing to keep in mind is delivery is the higher percentage of any bill, particularly during the winter. You can see the ratio there is roughly, my math isn't great, 20%, 25%, somewhere in that range of your total bill. Actually, less than 20%. So looking at the summer, and this again, these are rates kicking in June of this year, this month. You see that if we keeping our rates where we are, that flips. So as you also are likely aware, SDG&E dramatically decreased its generation rates and its delivery rates effective January 1 of this year. Although they increased them slightly in March this year, these are the current rates. And as you can see on an average monthly basis, the difference in cost for each of the member agencies. And those represent the 4 different vintages we have for PCIA calculation. So as you can see, the on average for the summer months at 377 kilowatt hours per month, the bill there is, you can see the difference there that there's a premium right now without a rate adjustment. So if you look at the comparisons with the generation and delivery costs averaged out over the entire year, you see on the top part, you have the winter months where by and large, you have a lower rate across all service territory. And then on the summer months, you have a higher rate by and large across all the service territories. So you can see the summer months difference per month, as well as the winter month benefit per month, again, with the $2.83 more in the winter this current year for Escondido and San Marcos as of January 1st of this year. Oops. So this shows if you take the entire bill, and I will say that the benefit of the IOU having dramatically reduced its delivery rates in addition to its generation rates, you can see the average difference on average across the year for the entire bill. And so when you look at it on average across the entire bill, again, with the slight outlier of Escondido San Marcos, we're slightly at a premium of close to 2% in Solana Beach Vintage, 0.5% in Carlsbad Del Mar, 0.9% in almost 1% in Oceanside Vista, and then 5% in Escondido and San Marcos. And again, that difference is due to the PCIA vintage year. So I mentioned earlier our rate setting priorities. One of the key rate setting priorities for CEA is to meet our JP Morgan line of credit covenants, specifically that we set rates to cover our costs and fund reserves, and that we meet our debt service coverage ratio and our days liquidity on hand, that we address our cash flow needs, that we provide, we have funds to meet our climate action plan goals. And as we've talked at length today about achieving our 100% renewable by 2035, to maintain rate stability, to meet a reserve policy of 5% as set by the board, to ultimately have financial stability sufficient to garner a credit rating by a credit agency, and to achieve rate competitiveness or be rate competitive to SDG&E. So we looked at 3 options for potential rate adjustments. The first of which, there's 3 options here that the board discussed at the end of May. The first of which was a 10% increase in summer rates effective July 1st, a 10% increase effective July 1st next year. That would result in an annualized bill increase, again, that annualized total bill increase of 6% over SDG&E's current rates. And again, we don't know where they're going to land. Option 2 was to adopt a rate that would go into effect on November 1st of this year when we drop into winter rates, and that would be a 20% increase, and that would carry through the year. That would result in a 5.7% annualized increase over SDG&E. Option 3 is to attempt to adjust for that already dramatic change from summer to winter rates by increasing winter rates slightly higher than summer rates. So the winter rate proposal was a 30% increase July 1st, and then adopt at that time, effective July 1st, a 15% summer rate change. And that actually has a less of an overall impact across the year, keeping in mind that the winter rates are in effect 7 months of the year, and the summer are in effect 5 months of the year. All of these options would meet the JP Morgan covenants and our rate setting priorities. So in looking at these considerations, one of the things we thought of and the board agreed with was that increasing rates right off the bat for new member cities in July was untenable. It was right when rates go up, so we keep our rates steady. We're already, at least for the next several months, the generation rates as compared to SDG&E are slightly more. And so doing that right away was, as I said, untenable. Bills already increased by $30 in the summer, and so doing that increasing would be something that would be a challenge for most ratepayers. Changing rates on July 1st results in a bill impact that where there's already a reduction of $30 per month on your bill, so the impact would be lessened, and you would ratepayers would feel that less. And then the idea of that option 3, where you change rates by a different percentage in the summer than you do in the winter, to sort of smooth out that rate impact across the year and create less of an impact throughout the year. Looking for that rate stability was something that the board ultimately thought was the best way to go. So this shows those 3 options in terms of the average total winter bill, average total summer bill, and then the average annualized monthly bill. And you can see the increases there of 6% over 6% over the current 5%, 5.7%, and 5.4% as compared to our current rates. This shows you visually what those 3 options look like from summer to winter. On the left, you have winter rates, which are obviously lower. On the right, you have the summer. The blue is the 10% option 1. The middle option 2 is the changing them once in November, and then the orange color is the different rate changes in summer versus winter. And as you can see, while the winter increase is greater when bills go down quite a bit already, and is a slightly greater, but in summer where bills go up dramatically, that impact is slightly less. And then this just shows those 3 options compared across the 4 vintages, remembering that Solana Beach has a 2017 vintage for PCIA, Carlsbad Del Mar has a 2020 vintage, Escondido and San Marcos have a 2022 vintage, and Oceanside and Vista have a 2023 vintage. So one thing I will say that's a little bit encouraging at this early stage is that due to the PCIA calculations that SDG&E has currently presented to the PUC with their ERA submittal, the PCIA for 2022 is coming down by roughly 19%. The PCIA for Oceanside and Vista is coming down by an even greater percentage, and Carlsbad and Solana Beach. Carlsbad and Del Mar, that vintage 2020 was negative for the last several years. That has resulted in quite a bit of bill savings over the first several years of CEA's operation. And good time to remind you when we're talking about these increases that since its inception, CEA has saved ratepayers throughout our territories an average of $6 per month since 2020 when CEA launched. And so that's something to keep in mind, that up until December 31st of this year, or last year rather, all ratepayers were realizing a benefit and a savings over SDG&E. Through the first 5 months of this year, every ratepayer was achieving a benefit over SDG&E except for Escondido and San Marcos. But the what's working to their favor is the PCIA vintage for Escondido and San Marcos is scheduled to decrease. And our consultant that we recently retained, NewGen, who does a lot of this rate work in forecasting PCIA and rates, is forecasting that PCIA will, over the next 3 years, drop down to be rather in line with the rest of the member agencies in CEA. So for those ratepayers, that's a little bit of good news in this difficult time, but that's where we are in the different vintages. So looking at our forecasts for the budget for this next fiscal year, if we employ these different options, option 1, you can see the change in net position projected at 16 million, option 2, 14.6 million, option 3, almost 24 million in the first year. And then the outlooks for the 5 years thereafter are rather comparable. You see a net change in position in that fiscal 26-27. That's largely due to energy costs and picking up a big chunk of resource adequacy that is required that year. Looking at it in a bar chart, this is a little difficult on the eyes, but what this shows is as we go through the year, you see the downturns here. These 3 months that we've just been through, the spring, January, February, March, April to June, is where we really have a difficult cash flow problem because winter rates have been in full effect for 7 months. And there's not as much revenue coming in. And then in the summer months, revenues tick up. And what this shows for these 3 options, again, orange, blue, and gray, is that in option 3, you can see in that downturn that it's slightly better condition in approaching the summer months. And that's because of the slightly higher rate adjustment in the November winter months and a slightly less in the summer. So it definitely satisfies our cash flow needs. But again, all of these satisfy our debt service coverage ratio requirement with JP Morgan, satisfies our days liquidity on hand with JP Morgan, and it also sets aside reserves in compliance with our rate setting or our budget policy by the board. The sub note down here is that we currently have a $40 million line of credit. We borrow against for procurement, particularly in these down months where our cash flow is low and we're ramping up to buy energy for the rest of the year, the summer months where it's very expensive. We expect to pay down that debt service line of credit every September. This September, October, roughly, we'll be paying that down. And then again, next September, October. Thereafter, and it's important to remember that line of credit, our agreement with JP Morgan, expires in January of 2026. I think that's this right here. My eyeballs are failing me. And so we haven't decided yet. We'll see how things play out to see if we want to maintain or extend that line of credit. But based on the projections that we're showing here, it looks like we can move on without that line of credit. But it remains to be seen because things can change. So at the board meeting last month on May 30th, the board reviewed this updated budget, projections for the end of the fiscal year and the fiscal 2024-25 budget, supported option 3. That's that split option, higher in the winter, a little lower in the summer. And then they also directed staff, although they adopted that and we're noticing a rate adjustment for the June 27th board meeting, they have asked staff to look at other options that might create a more smooth that rate impact over the year even more substantially. So we are looking at a potential option that wasn't ready to present to here tonight, but that would be, instead of a 30% increase in November, something on order of 40% and then 10% in the summer. And that really balances out the increases of those the two seasonal impacts. So, and it looks initially like it results in an even less of an overall annualized impact to ratepayers. So don't know where the board's going to land on that, but those 2 options are up for consideration at the board meeting this month. So that's the presentation. I will say what isn't in here that perhaps I'm just so used to sharing this with board members, and when we discussed it in April, we had a discussion about energy costs. Energy costs on the renewable side have more than tripled in just a year from March of 2023 to March of 2024. Renewable energy costs have tripled. Resource adequacy costs have skyrocketed to upwards of $120 per megawatt in this megawatt month in the summer. Again, I just said that the good news is that that was what we were recently forecasting. And we've recently got an offer for a cost much lower than that in the month of September. So not sure if that's just because the people, I'm not sure what's going on there, but that's good news. And then the energy costs of just conventional energy have also gone up by more than 3 times. So that's the reality, is that the energy costs are going up when we have a default product that is 50% renewable and 75% GHG free. That costs a lot of money to procure, and therefore it costs a lot of money to provide and cover financial sustainability and meeting our covenants. So it's a challenging time. Again, if there's good news, it's that projects at CAISO that are in that queue will slowly and steadily get approved and get under construction. And we'll see that scarcity challenge with resource adequacy as well as renewable energy start to wane and have some better access to that energy at lower cost. So that's what we're projecting in that 5-year outlook. But I've learned in my time, as little as it has been in this role, but also in my prior years, that predicting energy markets is largely a fool's errand, and you can only do your best. So that's where we are.
All right, thank you very much, Greg. Let's see if we have questions or comments from the board. Don.
There
you
you
go.
Oh, great. I want to talk about parity with SDG&E rates, because when the CA was launched, that made a lot of sense for recruiting customers and SDG&E rates were a little more predictable then, although they keep moving around. But as your data shows, SDG&E is charging 80% of the bill is transmission and distribution. So they're getting out of the generation business, and the contracts they have are all old. So they're lower. So it's an apple and orange comparison now. It doesn't make any sense to compare our rates to SDG&E. And I think more renewable content, reliable service, better customer service. Any of you who've had to interact with SDG&E recently know that the customer interaction experience is not great. I know that for the city of Del Mar, sometimes it took 6 months to get an adequate response for a minor problem with SDG&E. So I think the messaging needs to change a little bit. We've now got all these cities on board, right? So saying we're going to offer a rate less than SDG&E doesn't seem to be a necessary message. And it's clear that SDG&E has a lot of latitude to play around with their rates. I think the current rate is, will have to go up at some point. So my suggestion is we think about forgetting about what SDG is charging. I mean, they're ripping us off on transmission and distribution, so just stop there.
I appreciate the comment. And for better or for worse, the history of CCE is that you index your rates to the IOU. And not only do you do that in terms of it's a reliable rate upon which the PUC has weighed in, and there's been a lot of debate and discussion. That's been the model, right? Over the years, many CCAs have moved away from that expressly and outwardly. And that's happening more and more. And it is something that at this point in time, we haven't quite gone that direction, but that's an excellent point, because some CCAs are looking at a cost for service model, much like sewer rates or other local government rates. But we just haven't gotten there yet. And the interesting thing is that as much as I would agree with you that we're offering a service and programs and benefits to our customers, not the least of which is if you support our climate action goal initiatives to provide cleaner and greener energy into the grid, that we also offer programs that benefit those rate-paying members. So that, but at the same time, we're required by regulation to put out a joint rate comparison every year with the IOU. And so on the one hand, while what you're saying is accurate and we will steadily be moving away from that paradigm, we're still going to be required on an annual basis to put out that joint rate comparison, which seems to fly in the face of this idea that we're an independent load serving entity that is providing different benefits, different services, different quality of service, whatever you believe and what I believe is a benefit for CEA. You still have at the end of the day this requirement to put forward your joint rate comparison. So that's why we still do it. It's likely why we will do it to some degree for the foreseeable future. But in terms of setting rates, I think you're accurate that what we will be doing is looking at a cost model that is more reflective of what are our costs and how are we covering those costs and what is a fair rate.
Deborah.
Okay, so I just a couple of comments. I think one of the milestones is going to be when you have your customer base, which we're almost there.
Yeah.
And there's your shift. And I think at that point, then it becomes the product you're delivering, that we're offering to meet all these other goals. So I think I completely agree with Don that we're sort of at that point now where, we've got the enrollment, that the recent numbers you shared today were just incredible. The whole shift now should be on, we are all about clean energy and this is what we deliver, and that type of messaging, and get rid of, except for what is required by law, move away from that SDG, because you just don't want people flighting.
Mm-hmm.
So the less conversation centered around our product that's based with our with SDG&E, I think is the better solution. So.
Thank you, Deborah. Other questions, comments? Yes, Rick.
Yes, thank you. I wanted to thank Don for bringing that up because I was thinking along the same lines, but maybe not for the same reasons. But because their customer base is just shrinking, it doesn't match us at all what we do. And early in one of the other presentations, there was a comment about we have an obligation to always have more clean energy as a percentage than SDG&E does. Well, even that can get us into trouble when their customers drop so much, they could just say, oh, tomorrow we're 99% renewable tomorrow. And then where does that leave us? Thank you.
Paige.
I just want to get a clarification first. So the three, you mentioned renewables have gone up threefold in the last year or so. That's just a supply and demand issue. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. And then I was wondering, for our costs, CEA costs for procuring that energy, does it vary in the winter versus, is that why winter costs are lower, or is it just demand load, customer load is less?
It's the latter. It's the customer load. So your energy use goes down dramatically. Yeah.
Okay. So I'm just wondering about the fairness, if you would, about shifting that load to winter when, whether or not that's just to even out the costs of the monthly bill, or if it's really equitable for the actual cost of, anyway, just a thought.
And I will say just to that point that there were the similar comments made at the board meeting about not necessarily the fairness, but when electricity and energy costs go down in the winter, gas energy costs go up in the winter. And so there's almost, I think that not only is there the demand for electrical energy less in the winter, but I think historically there's been a tendency to decrease generation rates on electricity in the winter because the gas rates are going up. So there's an offset so that your total energy bill as a whole is comparable. That issue was raised, but there were members on the board that just felt that when you look at it over the course of the year, especially if you're looking at it again, notwithstanding, we're looking just at our current rates. So the increase over our current rates averaged out over the course of the year, full bill is less when you do that less of an increase in the summer, more in the winter. And that was appealing to members of the board, but that point was raised by other members of the board that you just brought up.
Tracy, did you have something?
Yeah, I've kind of got three. Well, I hate to say the word, but I think the PCI for Escondido is really bad. Is this something that we just have to accept? I mean, I'm looking at that saying, why should anybody in Escondido be with us when they wouldn't have to pay that if they were with SDG&E? I don't know if that's true. But that PCI is CIA or whatever it is so out of whack. It's just like lights up when it's not even cents, it's dollars more, and it's going to go up even further. If I was part of the Escondido City Council and saw that in the future, I would have said, no way. And that's the way I feel right now. I'm just shocked that it's that high and it's acceptable to all the other cities that it's that high for Escondido. And why is that? We're paying for the atomic weapons or something instead of somebody else. And I think too, we need to really put out there that 80% of your cost is the distribution. When I bring that up to people that there is no rule or requirement that distribution judged or something, and it's almost like sewer and water. Everybody thinks that the bill is just water, where it's your sewer fee and other things, and that 50 or 40% of that is just sewer costs, which is not on a meter. But I mean, that distribution needs to be highlighted, that a majority of your bill is distribution from SDG&E. And to me, it looks like nobody oversees that. And then the third one is, with more of us going to heat pumps for electricity or for heat in the winter, my electric bill actually goes up, or my electric use goes up because I'm not using gas. My gas bill is pretty much consistent the entire year because of using a heat pump. So I think with the push for heat pumps, for heating, we need to really look at that and look at the details, because mine doesn't show that. I'm pretty much using the same amount of electricity year round or even more in the winter because I have gone to an electric heat pump. Those are my three items.
Yeah, appreciate that. Those are excellent comments. And especially as we move into the decarbonization framework and look at electrification, the point you made at the end there is critical. This isn't to say this would always be the construct of the bills. This is for this next rate setting process. So I appreciate the comments. To answer your question, there is actually nothing we can do about the PCIA, and it's how it's calculated. It's been set by the PUC. It's wildly a mystery and a wildly frustrating, and I don't even know how to explain it other than to say that it depends the year you choose to leave, and in this case Escondido and San Marcos that year 2022, in which, by the way, is the lion's share of SDCP, our neighbor community choice program to the south, their vintage. The contracts that were in the portfolio for SDG at that time is what counts, is what they factor into this PCIA. And for whatever reason, there were some contracts in there, whether short-term or long-term, that just skewed that PCIA to what it is. Again, the benefit is not the benefit. The only good news is that the projections show that PCIA dramatically coming down over the next 2 to 3 years. Now, it can take some time, but that PCIA is going down. Finally, which may be news to some, but everybody, even bundled customers, pay a PCIA. It's different for bundled customers. So if you decide to go back to SDG&E, you're going to be paying a PCIA. Even if you never left bundled service, you're paying a PCIA. They just don't show it on the bill. It's factored into your generation rate. And that's something that CCAs throughout the state have been arguing with the utilities about doing. PG&E, SoCal Edison show their PCIA for all customers on the bill. SDG&E has yet to do so. And so that's something that we've asked them to do. Bill presentation is an issue that we've been working with their staff and their executive team for quite some time. But It is different. I won't say it's the same because they do the PCIA for bundled customers on an annual basis, and all of them are on an annual basis, but it's slightly different. But there is a charge that each customer pays for keeping all ratepayers indifferent from contracts that are rolling off and being taken on. So that isn't a great argument. I don't disagree that, our board member from Escondido was concerned with raised the same points you did in terms of how disparate that is compared to our other member agencies. But sadly, there's nothing we can do to change that. Now, what we may consider, and depending on where we end up with program budget, is that we may consider looking at a program that offsets somehow those customers for that increased PCIA. That is just something we've discussed in general terms, hasn't been vetted by the board, but it is something that could be, I think all rational people and ratepayers, I would hope, would look at that and say, yeah, if that's something you're doing for those accounts, those ratepayers, that makes sense. There is a process by which you can set rates differently for each vintage. And that would create a very challenging rate schedule for one, because you have 4 different rate schedules for every rate. And then you'd adjust the rate based on the PCIA so that every customer in the whole territory would have the same either premium or benefit. CEA chose not to do it that way. We just had one rate class for wherever your PCIA was, it was. And it would have created real practical problems. But these are some of the things we can look at moving forward in terms of rate setting and how we might be able to address that. But it is something that is on our radar because it is frustrating to see. And I always thought that a PCIA would steadily go down over time till it went to 0. And that's just not the way it looks like. It's not. And so it's a challenge.
Yes.
What jumps out at me, and I don't think I'd ever use this word, but the equality. It's the lower of the communities that are part of us is Escondido. I think it's like 80% of our low income of all the cities, and it has the highest one. So right there, equality just jumps out at me. And then seeing the new ones coming on board with such a lower number doesn't even make sense that it's the time you came in, the next year we should have waited then, and it would have been nothing. Because Oceanside and Vista doesn't look as high as Escondido and San Marcos. So the timing doesn't even seem to right that it should have been a recommendation of, oh, wait another year and your PCI would be $1 instead of 8 or 7. So thank you. I understand.
Yeah, and I do want to respond to that because, again, predicting these things is challenging. I would have never advocated to an agency that wants to wait and see what the PCIA does, because generally speaking, PCIAs have gone up slightly over time, but over the last several years, and I think by virtue of the fact that so much load has departed from SDG&E, that the stranded cost, the indifference equations, and I can't even begin to tell you what goes into factoring this, has just flipped all over the place. So I personally wouldn't have recommended anyone wait to try to time a better PCIA because there was just no way to reasonably predict that. Although I did make the exact same comment when I was talking to members of our risk oversight committee. It looks like that would have been a better option. And the same comment has come up with the board member from Escondido, exactly the comment you just made, because Escondido is, if you look at our demographics, is the lowest income population of any member agency. And again, from an equity standpoint, it is alarming when you see it particularly in those bar charts. And so that's one of the reasons we're looking at a possibility of rolling out a program that would help to address and alleviate that cost pressure for those customers.
Thanks, Greg. Yes, Roger.
Yeah, the thing that I guess stuck out to me is the cost of transmission and distribution, which it seems like the only way to get around that is to have local production. And so I'm wondering, have we got an idea of what fraction of our production we could do locally if we were to, pave the airports and things like that? And the other question is, if we did that, would we get any benefit from it, since they don't pay you any more for electricity delivered at the point of use than they do for electricity delivered in Escondido or in El Centro.
Right. I think you just answered the question at the end there, that realistically, although local generation is a positive, it's also local resource adequacy, where you have generation and storage, and you have the ability to store that energy and use it for resource adequacy is a huge benefit. But from a delivery standpoint, it doesn't change the cost of delivery. And in fact, we're about to roll out the income graduated fixed charge, which sort of throws that out the window as well. So interested to see how that plays out in everyone's energy costs or electricity delivery costs over the next 2 years, to see how that fixed charge really impacts ratepayers. I will say that for a city like Escondido, the modeling is showing that the more energy use you have, for example, climate-based communities that say rely more on air conditioning or use a lot more energy in the summer, will tend to be better off with a income graduated fixed charge. That's what the modeling shows. The downside of that is a large portion of our customers are coastal, and so it's those temperate, moderate climates where you don't use a lot of that energy that the inland customers do, that might not fare as well with the fixed charge. So these are all questions that, going to Dr. Mosher's point, slowly and steadily, it's okay, how are we going to manage our costs and set our rates for the benefits and the resources we're providing to our customers, as opposed to what SDG&E is doing. But clearly right now, it's the fact that delivery is the lion's share of the cost, and you have a utility that's already said they don't want to be in the generation business anymore. That's you can go back to SDG&E if you choose to do that, but for how long are you going to be there? They've already indicated we're in the third phase now of the provider of last resort proceeding. The IOUs, for better for worse, now are that provider of last resort, but SDG&E has stated they do not want to be the provider of last resort, which it doesn't make sense, because they've only got 10% of the customers in their service territory now. So.
All right, we're running a little short on time. I don't want to cut the discussion off, and I'll get to each of you, but let's remember the item on the agenda is the budget and the rate recommendations, and focus on that. So Deborah, you're next.
I
And
hope
then you,
this is
Jennifer.
aligned. I just wanted to know, you had mentioned the mitigating the PCIA as sort of a fee, right? Is what you're suggesting, that would subsidize, somebody would pay more, somebody would pay less, but it would subsidize a fee across the entire CEA. Is that what you're?
That's not the construct we're
not,
looking at. We're
okay.
looking at almost like a climate rebate that SDG&E just did, something along those lines, where it'd be a rebate and it wouldn't affect any other ratepayers.
Okay, and then is that something that other community power groups are actively doing, mitigating that impact on enrollment cities?
I don't think so. And I have to look into that. I honestly don't know, but
Okay.
that's a good question.
All right, thanks, Jennifer.
So I just have two questions. The PCIA does eventually go away, right? Or is that wrong?
Theoretically,
Oh,
once all the contracts that are under contract when you departed, so for Solana Beach 2017, all the contracts that were in their portfolio, once all those have been satisfied, theoretically the PCIA goes away.
but that could be like
30,
20,
they've
30
got
years.
contracts in that portfolio that we're not really allowed to see. That's part of this challenge, is lack of transparency, but I'm assuming there's 30-year contracts in there. There's some they may have just entered that are that long. There's 20-year, there's short-term, there's whatever goes into that calculation. We don't know everything that's under contract, but it's a long-term proposition.
Okay, and then my second question is, you mentioned that SDG&E is charging PCIA to their customers. So the rates that you were showing on your presentation from SDG&E, do those include PCIA
Yes.
in the rates?
Yes.
Okay,
That's part of their generation rate. Yeah.
okay, thank you.
Roger. No, you're done? Any other questions, comments? I have a couple. Number one, the slide deck that you showed us, will that be posted on the website and available somewhere?
Yes.
Great, because there's very good information in that. The SDG&E procurement miscalculation that they passed on to us, do you have any insight? How did that happen? And could that really hurt us?
Did I speak to that, or is this some?
Well, you mentioned the reason the budget was going upside down.
Yeah,
was
it
two
wasn't,
reasons.
it wasn't it was it was a load forecast.
Load forecast,
So the
right.
load forecast based on historical data, and to be fair, you factor in a year 2022, which was insanely hot that summer. So they likely, and I don't know how they go through this forecast, but they look at the forecast for that load for those customers in Escondido and San Marcos, and then they give a buffer because you don't want to undershoot the mark on the load, and they say, okay, that's the load forecast. This is the amount of energy you need to procure for those customers. And it just turned out that two things: one, they likely overshot the mark based on historical data, and two, because 2023, the summer, was so mild, we didn't even come close to approaching that forecast. So we were sitting on a bunch of energy that we sold back into the market, and a lot of times because the demand was so low, the cost was down in the day ahead market and in other markets. We just lost out on that cost. We didn't make up for that load disparity. Yeah.
Okay, so my suspicions, I can put them to rest. There wasn't something nefarious going on there. That we know of.
Could they have given us a more refined estimate? Maybe. It's hard to say. The good news is now that we have actual data, we have a load forecast we're operating under for Vista and Oceanside, but that's based on, again, historical data. So hopefully that won't be as miss the mark as much as last summer.
All right, well said. Ron?
One quick question about the load forecast. So I used to work for SDG&E, so I worked with load forecasting, and this is back when they were building power plants. But so that's an essential part of procurement, right? You need something to understand what you need in the future. Is that something that CEA is going to actively take over, or you always rely on SDG&E?
Yeah, we're actively, so we're going to rely on our own data. So with our partners, short answer, yes, we're going to be taking over that. So we know what that load forecast will be.
Okay, great. Thanks.
All right, I'm going to offer a comment because I can't control myself on the PCIA. I've always thought that it's a bit odd for other government services and facilities, and certainly in the private sector, we don't charge you if you leave and no longer need the service. If your city reduces its demand for courthouses or whatever other facilities, there is no exit charge. But in the power industry for SDG&E, which is a quasi-public entity, their position is they bought power in reliance on us being there, and if we leave, we have to pay them back for that. I've lost that argument. So I've sort of swallowed hard and accepted we have to live with the PCIA, although at core, I'm not really sure it's an appropriate government policy. Anybody got anything else they want to say on any of this? If not, we are pretty much at the end of the agenda. Thank you, Greg and everybody. Let me see if there's any public comment on this discussion we've been having.
We do not have any public speakers.
All right, Greg, anything else from you?
I think we have one more item.
Yeah.
Oh, we do, sorry.
Website.
And in the interest of time, if I could.
Oh, yeah, the
I
website
think-
review.
Yes, we've already received comments from
Dolores Jamison sent
yes,
some.
she's
Yes.
not here today. That's right. If you have comments, please pass them along via email or however you'd like to. We're going to be looking at how we can improve our website, and Dolores had quite a few suggestions.
All right, thank you.
You could send them directly to Kaylin. Yeah.
All right, and I will send you, I just learned, and perhaps I should have known, that new federal law that went into effect in April now says all government websites have to be ADA accessible, which is going to require pretty significant modifications to, what's that? I am, this happened in April. But so that will have implications for us. I think we're not required to have it in place for the next 2 or 3 years, but I have a hunch it's not a trivial or inexpensive undertaking. All right, anything else? Yes.
Just
Paige.
for the website, I just want to make a comment because a lot of people have talked about the delivery charges, and that's not on the homepage. There's nothing on there, although there are, to show the costs up the increases with the different options. So I would somehow get that on the homepage so that people understand that the lion's share of your bill is delivery. Anyway, just my thought.
All right, that's a website comment.
Yep.
All right, anything else? Last call? All right, thank you all for coming and we'll see you. The next meeting is when? August 8th. All right, see you all then. We are adjourned. So your motorcycle and your key were still there? Yes.
Changing glasses and getting my helmet off. Totally forgot.
Is it obvious where the key is? Could somebody have?
Sort of. Fortunately, the handlebars are the.
Yeah.
But anyway, he's a motorcycle. So.
Well, don't feel bad. I remember Joshua Bell one time left his Stradivarius violin in a taxi cab.